to our community, and so be it. So welcome again, welcome back to the Spirit Society of Baltimore. Today, Saturday, we have always our presentation, our talk. And today we have a guest speaker from Carroll County, our dear Kirsten, who is going to continue with the chapters, with the different chapters of the book. What is the book? Can you put it there, Daniel? Yes, Health and Consciousness. And today is the second part of chapter 18. So with no further ado, we are going to let Kirsten to enlighten us. Thank you.
Good evening, afternoon, everyone. Are you a thumbs up, Alba, if you can hear me? No, you can't hear me yet. Okay. Well, as we wait here for a moment to get our audio on, just give me a thumbs up as soon as you hear me. Is that a thumbs up? Yes, you hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're watching this from, when you're watching this video from. Just be welcome. What a topic we have in store for us today. Thank God that we are discussing and we are in a state of hopefully openness. We are in a state of tranquility and just a readiness to just embrace new ideas, new thoughts. Now, as you all may be aware, during this series, and if you haven't watched the other lectures, we do recommend you obviously going back and watching the other ones. And more importantly than watching the previous videos is going and reading this particular book. And you can see it here on the screen, Times of Health and Conscientiousness, a fantastic read and study because it helps us, it draws us closer to our own understanding of ourselves and thereby understanding those around us, and hopefully in all of that facilitating ultimately our happiness. Because after all, what is life without joy, happiness, feeling at peace? Especially when you've gone through a ton of struggle and challenges, you tend to value peace and joy so much more in its simplest form. So today's chapter, it is on conscientiousness and mental alienation. And briefly, I can just tell you, in this chapter, she starts out talking about the conscience, and we all know where our conscience is, and that our conscience speaks to us. No matter who we are, what background we come from, the laws of God are written in our conscience. And she brings us to this idea of mental alienation. And she brings us to the root cause, what lies deep down as the root cause of mental alienation, which we'll talk about this. She actually says the deep psychogenesis, and that is guilt. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And what I hope for all of us to take home today, even if we don't understand the ins and outs of the complexities as Joanna breaks things down, but at the very least, if we could just understand that today's takeaway is for us to live a healthier and happier life, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, to practice self-forgiveness, to give forgiveness, and just be conscientious, to make that conscious effort to work towards being better. And it could be something as simple as getting up in the morning, doing a prayer, setting the tone for your day. And oftentimes when we are beginning or re-beginning our spiritual journey, or it's January 1st or January 2nd, and we want to reach those goals for the year, and we're refreshing ourselves, and we think, okay, well, where do I start? Where do I begin? Begin with the simplest thing. begin in the morning or maybe even at night. And just what's important is just to begin with that open heart, with that determination. With that, Joanna, in the beginning of this chapter, as I said, she talks about mental alienation. And just to level set, for us all to be on the same page of what mental alienation is, it's a feeling of disconnection, of isolation from oneself, from others, from society. And this can be the results, and this just comes from Google definition. And this can be a result of social, cultural, or political upheaval. The symptoms of alienation could be feelings of loneliness, isolation, anxious or tense, losing self-confidence, feelings like we don't belong, rejecting social value standards, feeling distant from family, struggling to find purpose in life. Just for us to level set, and that this is what it can look like when we have this feeling of, and we're experiencing mental alienation. So, Joanna starts out this chapter, again, level setting with us, letting us know where it all begins within us. And she says, the conscience is found in individuals at every stage of their evolution. In the earliest stages, it manifests as flashes of discernment that drive them to reach higher levels. Despite the predominance of aggressive instincts, sometimes flashes of conscientiousness arise and brighten the stormy night of impulses, expanding the horizons of perception. Really, really fancy, respectfully I'm saying this, fancy words from Joanna, but allow me to illustrate with an example what she is essentially saying right here. There's a famous story of a man somewhere here in America in like the early 1900s. He committed a crime. It was the middle of winter. He committed a crime. They put him in the jail. He escapes. And the jailer proceeds to run after him. And as he's running over a frozen lake. He's running away from the jailer, and the cops, I should say cops. So he's running away from the cops. And as he's running and he's going across this frozen lake, all of a sudden he hears this loud crack and swish and boom, and he turns around and he sees that one of the cops had fallen through the ice. So in that moment, his instinct was just to run back and help the cop. Although a part of him thought, well, I could just get away and I'd be free. But his greater instinct was, no, I have to help this person no matter what. So he runs back, helps the cop out of the frozen lake water, body of water, whatever it was, helps him out, gets recaptured, and gets put to death later. Now, when you think about this story, and forgive me, it is well known, or it's a historical fact, and I can share where this is later somewhere in another state, not in the state of Maryland, this happened. But what's interesting about this is when you think about it, how crazy in a sense this criminal was. So many might think, wow, he could have just gotten away. But he had a greater instinct within him. And Joanna refers that this flash of conscientiousness. He just knew that that was the right thing to do, despite the fact that he knew that getting caught for whatever crime that he did, he was going to get put to death. But he still went back to save that other person. Now, as dramatic as this story is, and true as it may be, so history tells us, it is an illustration in many ways of how our lives, how we are in our lives. That we can be in this mix of maybe not living our best life, making mistakes, yet at the same time, we do have many great moments where we are making the right decisions, where we are doing good things. So there are areas where we fall short and other areas where we're stronger. So Joanna's just breaking that down for us. Later, she says, as reason develops, the conscientiousness expands and may become a victim of evasive mechanisms of cunning and of the intellect, which numb it, harm it, or poison it with the pernicious vapors of emotional aloofness. What does this mean? Well, as we become more aware of what's going on within us and around us, and our intellect, our reasoning grows, we are able to get distracted more, or we allow ourselves to get distracted more because we don't want to, we don't want to deal with the realities of what real life is. I want to enjoy life. I want to do things that just make me feel good, and that's it. Surface level. So there's this constant need for us to be really conscientious, to be present and be cognizant of everything that we do in day-to-day life. But she says, even so, even with all of that, conscientiousness breaks through the barriers and glimmers, making way for discernment and conflicts arising from its identification of wrongful acts. So she says, even despite our own attempts when we become distracted with life, that push to be better still comes through. And we learned that in Spiritism, the law of progress, the march is always forward. Like it or not, we are constantly moving forward, constantly growing. So as much as we may try to remain still, we will always be moving forward and learning. That is it. That is what differentiates us from the animals, is this innate desire to grow, to learn, to do more. And let's not even get into discussion. We love animals. Not trying to say that animals can't learn. Let's sidebar that for another discussion. I digress. Joanna goes on to say, only when individuals go beyond the primary stages, when experiences become more significant through an understanding of the lofty meaning of life, does it fully manifest and begins to control the direction of existence, revealing itself victorious. And we can see this example in individuals who, as they mature, as they experience life, and we realize what really matters, oftentimes after we've suffered a great deal, after we've gone through a great deal of turmoil, and all we long for is just peace, we begin to really get a sense of what really matters, what's really important, and really start to focus on what is a positive goal for us. So that would be that direction. She goes on to say, the conscience is the inner referee in charge of setting sure guidelines for one's life, varying in lucidity according to its stage of development. Only when it becomes level-headed can it lead the individual wisely. The conscience glows when reflecting the laws of God. It guides individuals toward the good, happiness, and peaceful progress in a climate of faith and hope. The ennobled conscience establishes the regime for reparation and evolution based on the laws of love, always supported on truth and justice. And oftentimes this referee is often depicted as the good angel or bad angel on our shoulder. But it's that inner knowing of what is right and what is not right. And that is our internal compass. One that we should be connecting with as a source of guidance in our lives. And it is extremely easy in this day and age to really get distracted because life is so full of distractions. We have the advanced artificial intelligence, electronics, social media, everything is instant gratification. Everything, it seems like it is really in existence to lead us astray, to live a life full of distraction. That's why we have to make our own efforts to focus and every day with intention reaffirm our goals that we have for our lives. Other way, without even realizing it, we can wake up one day and realize that we're kind of off the beaten path. We're far away from our initial goals that we had hoped for or worked towards, at an earlier point in our lives, or we have set for ourselves. And how beautiful, if we can imagine, Joanna says, the conscious glows when reflecting the laws of God. Imagine having that sensation within us when we are truly living those laws of God. And if you read part 3 of the Spirit's book, The Divine Natural Laws, with the last law of love, charity, and justice, I believe it is, it really sums up everything. If we can practice that, we really are in good shape. Practicing and expressing charitable or charity and love and justice. If we know nothing else in life, if we fail to understand anything else, those basic things can really be a lighthouse, our own internal lighthouse, and by way of just how things naturally occur, we can be a light for others as well. And that sense of peace is absolutely priceless. We cannot explain or overemphasize what it means to have that internal peace within us, because to be without it is truly like a ship lost at sea. You're just wandering about without a compass. So I digress back to Joanna. She brings us to the second half of this chapter, where she gets into the psychogenesis of mental alienation. She says the following, and this is where we wanted to spend a little bit more time. In the deep psychogenesis of mental alienations lies the guilty conscience, the cause of torments that manifest as processes of reconstruction, recomposing the panels of duty by means of the painful mechanisms of mental disorder. In the deep psychogenesis, meaning where it stems from, lies that guilty conscience. And just as a sidebar, just for us to remember, in the book Existential Conflicts, and the next couple slides, I'm going to bring an excerpt from that book. But in that book, Existential Conflicts by Joanna, there's a chapter entitled Guilt, and it is chapter 6. And she says that there are 2 psychological causes of guilt. One from our past, the shadows of our past, and from our childhood. Now we can read that chapter to go more into depth and the more finite descriptions. But it is something interesting and really beneficial for us to learn and read about where this guilt can come from. But ultimately, doing an internal deep dive within us doing that internal deep dive within us is where we will begin our journey and where we must begin. It's the only way we can uncover ourselves, for lack of a better way to put it. And just before we go on to share the rest of what Joanna shares, it's important for us to remember that as we do this internal journey, for us to not do so under the guise of feeling bad about ourselves, to feel shame, for us to be hard on ourselves, that is not at all how Joanna wants us to go about this, how Spiritism, and dare I say, how God wants us to live our lives, but rather to be curious about ourselves, to have the courage to be curious about ourselves, who we are, and to have the courage to face that, and also the knowing that I am a child of God. I am worthy and deserving of love and happiness, and that I can find that, and to be open, and to know that we must move on and keep on moving on. We learn, we grow, and we do better. This is really important because Joanna really emphasizes a lot throughout the Spiritist literature: self-compassion, self-forgiveness. It does no one any good to ruminate in guilt or to ruminate in shame. There is something, and I'll bring a quote here later, about healthy guilt, that recognition of something we did that was wrong and we must do better and repair. But it's never good to ruminate. It does not help us. In the history of humankind, it's not helped us to ruminate. But to recognize, yes. Joanna goes on, the breakdown of the mind provides the spirit with unsuspected suffering as a rigorous way to appease the conscience. Since humans are the authors of their moral reality through their chosen behavior in the course of corporeal existences, at each step they prepare the method for their inner growth by means of their actions. When they fail morally, they engrave with fire the means for reparation in their deep makeup, particularly in the area of the mind. So we, through our own knowing or unknowing, through our own actions, we write within our souls, within our conscience, all that we have done. And no matter from one life to another, although we do have that forgetfulness of the past, Joanna reminds us, particularly in the book Existential Conflicts, in the chapter 6 entitled Guilt, of that emotional memory, that we may not consciously remember the details of what we may have done in the past. But that emotional memory, that sense of guilt that we carry with us, as she puts it here, gets engraved in fire. And just as an interesting little tidbit, at least in a physical sense, when we have burns to our skin, it is, and if you've ever worked with burn patients, it is a type of pain and scarring that is unbelievable. And so we share that for the mere fact of to imprint or impress upon us that everything that we do stays with us. However, as painful as the remembrance of things that have passed that we cannot change, the beauty of regrowth and our ability to heal is immense and, dare I say, in a sense, miraculous and beautiful, because God is so gracious, God is so grand in bestowing upon us this ability to forgive ourselves, to forgive others, to move on and to do better. Even when we, quote unquote, fail morally. She continues on, when unfortunate actions were undetected by human justice, the conscience, which is cognizant, disarranges the complex mechanisms of the unbalanced mind, which only expunging pain can recompense. Within the context of mental alienations, whether in known, academically studied psychopathologies or in severe obsessions, it is the guilty conscience that facilitates the installation of the illness, which is expressed most rigorously during the process of readjustment and rebalancing. I'll give you a case study from the book by Andrea Louise, Between Heaven and Earth. There is the case of a mother. It was the case where there was a married couple, and they had 2 children, and the mother passes away, and the father remarries, and the deceased or disincarnated spirit of the first wife hangs around and is really jealous of the new wife, but is unable to sort of reach her on a spiritually energetic level. But the second wife, one day, is with her stepson and her new husband, and they're at the beach, and she really doesn't like her stepchildren, particularly her stepson, let's just say, because she wants all the attention for herself. This child is from a previous marriage. So when they're at the beach and her stepson is out in the water, she begins to see him drown. And instead of immediately reacting and running out to go get him, she kind of pauses for a time, and he drowns and dies, but she eventually does try to go get him. But she carries that guilt with her because she knows that deep, deep within her, she kind of did want him to die. And so after he dies, she gets into this really depressive state of mind where she has this immense guilt. Through that, it opens up something within her, some sort of internal matrix in her mind, wherever you want to say, wherever it's located, that facilitates the installation of the obsession of the first wife, who was just waiting in the wing for quite some time, waiting for the moment where she can really get her claws into her, if you will. Quite literally, she did. And so the obsession gets installed through that weakness of the second wife, the first wife, and that obsessive process that begins. They go into a little bit more detail in the book, and you can read more about it. It's quite fascinating. But at the same time, it's reality, and it can happen. And it probably happens more often than what we are even aware of, because our physical eyes don't necessarily, unless you are a profound medium, we don't see those things happening. So they're so subtle. They go unnoticed. Unless, like I said, unless you're a medium, that with extensive mediumship, or really just clairvoyant or really aware of things. So this is just an example of how when we become emotionally, mentally unwell, when these little things become bigger things and we sort of become what would be analogous to immunosuppressant, we suppress our immune system. For instance, when we are in a situation where we are constantly getting stressed out, science has shown that our ability's immune system to fight back gets lowered. It's not as strong. So similarly, in a spiritual sense, the same thing happens, more or less. So these are the things for us to be really aware of as we begin to feel any unsettling emotions. Not that we should deny and pretend like we don't feel them, but to work through them. And as much as we've said this, and as much as it almost feels kind of funny to say, because we say it so much, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's true. But praying through those moments, especially when we don't know how to climb out of those types of emotions, feelings, situations, prayer is the best guide for us. Prayer is always the best guide for us on where to begin. But she begins to tell us, a level-headed conscience is maintained with good thoughts and reflection, which are the available, invaluable means for individuals to evolve. It is, imagine, it is our multivitamin, if you will. A level-headed conscience. Trying to focus on good thoughts, replacing our negative thoughts with good ones, feeding our souls positive things, whether it's watching an uplifting talk, movie, or reading things that are uplifting, that are funny in a positive way, not funny putting anybody down, but resetting our own energy levels, our own emotions, and choosing to focus on the positive rather than submitting ourselves to despair. And she lets us know the best therapist, a lucid and clear conscience, is the best therapist for mental alienations. A lucid and clear conscience. Which is why all patients in need of health should not shirk the Herculean task of self-pacification, a deep reflection, self-knowledge, and ennobling actions, all of which are conducive to a peaceful conscience responsible for achieving progress. So self-pacification, self-soothing, finding ways to calm ourselves, to recenter ourselves. And that could be through different mediums, such as yoga, meditation, prayer, always prayer. Just taking time to stop and reflect. Self-knowledge, whether that is getting to know the ins and outs of how I am, but also feeding ourselves positivity and ennobling actions. Ennobling actions, being kind to others, being charitable, whether it's volunteering somewhere or also being kinder to our neighbors when we walk outside, being cheerful, saying hello, helping at our local soup kitchens, or just locally a lot of nowadays, at least in our local cities, there's a lot of opportunities to be of help in your community. And they can be really small things. They don't have to be huge acts where they take hours and hours of our time. Because it's not about how big, but how much of our heart we put into it. All of these things help us to come to that peace within us. And there's a question, as always, Joanna, in the second half of this book, she ends with a question from the Spirit's book, which is question 834. Are humans responsible for their thoughts? And the spirits respond, they are responsible before God. God alone can know their thoughts and condemn or absolve them according to divine justice. And Joanna ends this chapter. Mental alienations are, therefore, God condemning the wrongful thoughts and actions of the primitive and mistaken conscience. And we did want to state, before we go on to our next slide, that God is not a condemning God. And when we read this, we might think that. But what it is that the laws of God are written in our conscience. We ourselves are the ones who are condemning, who that guilt inevitably will be felt sooner or later. So if we ever think, and we think about people that do wrong to us or to others, and we think, oh, they're happy, or maybe for a time they're able to distract themselves in their lives, rest assured, no matter who we are, whatever walks of life we come from, sooner or later in this life or the following life, that realization, that coming to terms with reality, which is our conscience, which we cannot run from, will come to fruition. Sooner or later, we have to face ourselves. So in that, we call our own attention, which oftentimes is in the form of guilt. But remember what Joanna says. There are two psychological causes of guilt, from our past and from the origins in our childhood. So without getting more into depths about that, encouraging you to read chapter 6 of Existential Conflicts. But all that to say that this is why it's so important for us to do and have moments of self-reflection, whether that looks like journaling, whether we are seeing a therapist. And by the way, therapists should be seen as we see dentists, as we see our primary care doctors, as we see our acupuncturist or our chiropractor. They are simply just avenues for us to heal. So it's good for us whether we see one once a year, twice a year, once a month, twice a month, 3 times a month, whatever the amount we need to help us to get back to a state of balance, of healthiness. And in sharing all of this, we did want to share a few final ideas, but also a reminder that despite all these things that we know we have the power to both bring ourselves sickness, but also healing. But knowing all of that, there's always that additional element, and that is the spiritual world. That is the spirits that are among us. Those that want us to see us do better, and those whom do not. So we have to always be mindful that not only am I the existence of my own inner struggles, we have to always consider that there's always an additional component. That sometimes our feelings and how, the sensations we're picking up on could have an effect from that spiritual component. But even more so, even if there are people, because there are people who don't believe in those types of things, that's okay. If we can just focus on trying to be the best versions of ourselves, if we can focus on trying to be more loving, more kind toward ourselves, towards others, spending more time of self-reflection, that alone, and through prayer, and as Joanna put it, through ennobling actions, will help us beneficially. But some takeaways for today: how to release guilt. Sometimes we know where our guilt comes from, sometimes we don't. And in Existential Conflicts, Chapter 6, Joanna shares some tidbits and some reminders. She says, there is healthy guilt that should accompany human actions when they do not correspond to patterns of balance and ethics. However, that feeling should be faced as a sense of responsibility. So there is healthy guilt, recognition we did something wrong. Let's repair it. Let's fix it right away. However, when we have guilt that is really disturbing us, one of the ways to release that is through forgiveness. Forgiveness to ourselves, to the victim, or to the community. And Joanna even says to nature. But forgive. Don't forget that self-forgiveness is imperative in this process as well. And she says the courage to ask for forgiveness and the capacity to forgive. The courage to ask for forgiveness and the capacity to forgive are two therapeutic mechanisms that release us from guilt. So forgiveness is important. And I believe recently a talk was given at the SSB about forgiveness. I want to say Agnes may have given it, can't recall off the top of my head, but I do believe, if memory serves, to encourage you, if not Agnes, I'm sure there's other talks given on that topic of forgiveness. Additionally, how to increase conscientiousness, because this book is about conscientiousness and health. So how can we become more conscientious? Living with intention. We've talked about some of these things before. Setting goals for ourselves. Sometimes we have huge goals that seem insurmountable, but oftentimes we just need to have some basic, smaller goals. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we think of the word small as negative, and it's not. Staying engaged and present in our relationships, getting organized is a big thing. That alone can help us feel more grounded. Being patient with ourselves. This is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. If we don't feel okay in 10 minutes, give yourself some grace. Give others some grace. But oftentimes, if we are unable to give others grace, it's because oftentimes we are unable to give grace to ourselves. Limit procrastination. Stay disciplined. Have a routine. Create and stick to that routine. It's amazing how comforting and how good it is to be disciplined. And last but not least, if we need professional help, when we have a toothache, we go to a dentist. When I'm not feeling okay, talk to a therapist. When you have chest pain, hopefully you're going to see your cardiologist or your doctor or what have you. So this goes without saying, but having a religion, a spirituality in our lives, one that we practice, whether it's coming to our Spiritist Center, or if those who go to their church or synagogue or whatever brick and mortar place, location they go to, it's important that we have that connection with God, that we have that grounding of our spirituality, because we are creations of God. We are children of God. As much as we may be distracted or get distracted, or maybe perhaps want to deny that, we are children of God. And really, that's our lifeline. That is what will always bring us back, is our connection with God, what will ground us, and ultimately will bring us joy in our day-to-day lives. So these are the reminders, these are the things for us to think about. Self-forgiveness, forgive others, work every day, setting goals, be disciplined, to pray in the morning, to be focused on the positive, despite what might be happening around us, and just trust in that inner connection we have with God. Despite the stormy seas, we always have that ability to connect with our eternal inner compass and to know the path forward. So, dear friends, we thank you so much for listening to these words from Joanna. We hope that you can release yourself from any guilt, past, present, wherever it may come from, and know that you are valuable, you are loved, and worthy of happiness. Thank you, everyone.
In the highlights of this amazing chapter and knowledge. And it feels that there are concepts that we naturally know, but with Joanna's words and the way she put it is very strong. A lot of food for thought and a lot of things to start if we haven't started yet. So we're moving to our section of questions or comments. We're going to start with the audience here. I don't know, someone has a comment, a question. Paula is saying yes, so I'm moving. Okay. Okay, Paula, go ahead.
Thank you. It was great, and only 2 more chapters to go. you, you get an award for due diligence for working through this book. Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking right along with you, and the origins of guilt from past lives and childhood we're really not that conscious of. So I guess I'm most interested in how we create more guilt consciously as adults. So what I came up with was, out of your talk, transgressions, when we know we've gone off the moral path. And then, like the example of the lady in the story, omissions, she didn't move immediately to save the child. And then the third one I came up with was setting the bar too high and then feeling bad that we didn't meet it, or expecting others, putting the bar too high for them. And then, of course, the treatment is self-examination of conscience. And it appears to me forgiving yourself is equal to forgiving another. You do it 70 plus 7 and you keep on going.
Cannot hear you.
I said perfect. In a nutshell, I hear an echo. Okay. Perfect in a nutshell, Paula, what you just said, I think summarized the entirety of my presentation. Absolutely. Yep. If we can transcribe what Paula just said and put it in the notes, boom. Don't even have to watch my talk. There you go.
Transgression, omission, and set the bar too high. Okay, we got it. Anyone else here? Daniel, please.
Hi, Kirsten. I have a question. So when I was thinking about the tie to mental alienation, of course, without reading the chapter, I thought Joanna Judgley was talking about when someone is out of sync or is I know that you touch a lot of in guilt, so I I I think about guilt about the emotion that is specific when they're talking about mental alienation is more general, a more general concept, right? Because mental alienation could be someone that really isolate himself or herself from society, right? But it seems that this mental alienation is focused more in guilt because guilt is more related to past wrongdoing, right? Like when we do something that we regret and we stay in that loop. And that's why the suggestion is like the self-forgiveness is the first step. But does she mention about, this out of sync that people find themselves, not necessarily guilt, but according to the definition, alienation. So that's what came to my mind. So is there anything related to that?
You're in
You're can you hear me now? Okay. So thank you, Daniel, for that question. And absolutely great that you pointed that out. I have often found through studying this book that sometimes Joanna's titles for her chapter don't right away seem to click, but it's only through further investigation and studying and reading and studying and reading, rinse and repeat, do we come to the understanding of how wise she is and very intentional about her naming her chapters. But essentially, she tells us because mental alienations is a generalized term. It can encompass a lot of different feelings. Feelings of anxiousness, of feeling like you're not connecting, you feel isolated from others, feel distant from your family. But saying all of that any and all of these mental alienations, Joanna says, in the deep psychogenesis, which basically, when you think about, let's just go straight to the root cause. Like, we can talk about all of these symptoms, which is what mental alienation is, it's a symptom. But what is the cause? So I have a cold, so I'm sneezing, my nose is running, and I can figure out and explain to you from a medical standpoint why our nose runs and how it's our immune system reacting, and the mast cells, which are part of one of the white blood cells that, and go into the whole explanation. And you'd be really fascinated by it, but it still wouldn't cure the problem, the main reason, which is whatever virus or bacteria is causing the issue. So Joanna doesn't really like to waste time, I have found. So she lets us know in the beginning half of this chapter about our conscience, that everyone has one, and that we can avoid it, and that all in the second half, as she just goes into mental alienations, the deep root of it is guilt. And so where does guilt come from? Well, she doesn't actually talk about where guilt comes from necessarily in this chapter. She does in existential conflicts. We brought it in just to add to it. But what she talks about is this breakdown of the mind through this guilt. So the breakdown of the mind can end up causing a plethora of different mental alienations or even mental disorders. And again, all of that stemming from, as she says, from guilt. So how do we focus on healing that guilt, healing that mental alienation? When she talks to us about lucid and clear conscience, working towards ennobling actions, those are the things that there are, for me, as in reading and studying this, is that is the essence. And I think there's a reason also, and we might not, or folks may not have really picked up on it. At the end of every chapter in the second half of this book, she always puts one question from the Spirit's book. And often it doesn't seem like it connects until you really study it. And in that question here, and forgive me, Daniel, for elongating this, but she says, are humans responsible for their thoughts? Why does she bring that question? Out of the 1,000 questions in the Spirit's book, why that question? I believe it's because a lot of what we experience is through our mind, through our emotions. And that is where we need to work on ourselves, whether it's through deep reflection, through prayer. You know, if healing purely came from just eating right, going to the gym, I mean, vast majority of people would be cured, but we're not seeing that. So it's something beyond that. It's deeper within us. I don't know if I really answered your question.
Daniel say yes. Thumbs up. Daniel is someone from virtual world? No? Because I have a question for you, Kirsten. More of more in a personal level as a mother. You as a mother. Because this chapter and the whole book is telling us how important it is for us to liberate ourselves from a guilty conscience, right? So we learn those skills when we are little. Parents or adults supposed to teach us that, but sometimes they don't. And then we are struggling as an adult, not to point fingers to anybody. It just happened because it is not common, the education of the emotions, right? It is not common, the education of the mind and how to serene ourselves. And if we are angry, how to get to a point of balance, etc. So you as a mother, as a spiritist mother, what would you recommend to other parents that are adults that are taking care of children? How can we provide them with the elements or the tools for them later on be a more healthy adults?
Great question, Abba. Okay, is the echo gone? Yes, it is. Well, it seems like sometimes the word mother is synonymous with guilt. But doing our best to map out a plan of how we want to raise our children and to execute that plan in however way it looks for us, whether that's bringing our kids to the Spiritist Center or teaching them at home or just being cognizant, all the moments that you can be with your children to educate them. And I do want to point out there's another book by Joanna called Family Constellations. And she talks a lot about education of children and family in that book, and is absolutely, I think it's a must for families, for parents to read that, because the level of responsibility we have is immense as parents, but as teachers, as aunties, as uncles. It's really important as we are interacting with children that we are taking every opportunity to teach them, and not just through our words, but through our actions. And I say that in the same breath, I want to say how important it is to give ourselves grace as parents. And sometimes we only learn this through experience, but to have grace, give ourselves grace that we're not perfect. And oftentimes it takes us growing up and having our own children to also realize, and then turning back and giving our parents some grace and forgiveness and understanding, because then we go, oh, it's kind of hard. It's not that easy, And as parents, we do our best, and that's all we can do. And, every child is unique and different, and all we can do is love them and do our best. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
You did, and two comments after your answer. The first one, for the people who is a parent right now, for the ones who are parenting right now, whatever is your biological child or adoption or foster, whatever, you are the right adult for that child, for that soul. It's not randomly. It's like, okay, let's send to Kirsten and Daniel these 4 souls and let's see what they do. No, it is a whole plan there. So the best mother, the best father, or the best grandparents for the children is you. There's no other way. The other thing that you made me think about it when you talk about extended family, which in family constellation, Joanna De Angelis talks about the importance of the extended family and how responsible we are for those children in the family. It's not only the responsibility of the father, mother, whoever. You made me think about these different communities around the world, especially in societies like Africa, in which raising children is the responsibility of the whole community. It's not only mom and dad. So actually just yesterday, the day before yesterday, I'm sorry for extend myself, I have the opportunity to have an interview with interviewing a gentleman from Cameroon. And he said that in his villages, in his small villages, he could go very tranquil to work. He and his wife, they were educators in Cameroon, leaving the kids at home because they knew that neighbors, without asking them, they are going to take care of the kids in all senses, feed them, watch that they are okay, but also if they misbehave, this lady that lives 2 doors from me, she's correcting me, she's disciplining me. So I think that the more we go towards that idea, that I believe is a healthy idea of growing together and growing as healthier individuals, I think that there will be an answer there too. So I don't know if anyone has another comment or we are ready to move to our final prayer. Daniel, are we going to ask Kirsten to do the final prayer? Okay, Kirsten, so please guide us in the final prayer, please.
Turn your mic.
Hello? Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, dear Spirit benefactors, our Master Jesus, we thank you for the blessing of this moment together, this moment to reflect on these uplifting ideas and ideals. Dear God, we ask that these teachings remain in our minds and in our hearts. May we have the courage to continue to reflect, to think about them throughout our day-to-day. May we have the courage and the openness and the curiosity to get to know ourselves, to love ourselves, to forgive ourselves, and also to show the same compassion to others. Dear God, we pray for all these things. We pray for our nation and all nations across this globe, that they too may feel and learn about forgiveness, about loving. May you, dear God, dear Spirit benefactors, spread this healing light over this whole globe for those who are suffering, for those who are lost, for all of those who we are connected to. And may we always remember that we are children of a most high God that loves us and reminds us that we are worthy of joy, of love, of happiness. We thank you, and so be it.